Mr. Ashwin Sanghi, thank you so much for speaking to us on Times Now on this very special episode. We're also speaking on a very special occasion in the build-up to Diwali. And this country has been witnessing quite a few developments that have actually raised questions about the kind of trajectory and direction that it is heading in. And if somebody like you could actually shed some light on the civilizational spiritual renaissance that India is actually experiencing, that would be great. It's my honor and privilege to be speaking to you, sir, especially after having read your books, Chanakya Chant, as well as the Rosable Line. You're also the author of Krishna Ki. Thank you so much for actually speaking to us on Times Now.
Thank you, Siddharth. I'm delighted to be joining you today on this wonderful occasion, and my greetings to all of your viewers. Siddharth, to answer your question about Renaissance, yes. You know, the word Renaissance itself comes from French, which actually means rebirth. Yes. But rebirth can only happen if something has died. And Hindu civilization never died, despite all the efforts to kill it. Our civilization is one of the very few pre-Bronze Age civilizations to have survived the onslaught of Abrahamic thought. So in my view, this is not rebirth that we are seeing, but probably just an awakening. And this is not a religious awakening, but a civilizational awakening. It's very important to be able to distinguish this. Sanatan Dharma, the precursor to what now we consider to be Hinduism, was and continues to be pluralistic. Unfortunately, as a result of the various invasions that happened into India, Abrahamic thought came in as espousing a singular truth for a plural world, that there is only one true God. It was this absolutism coupled with expansionism and conversion that wreaked havoc on many civilizations. Zoroastrian culture was demolished in Iran. The Mithraic cults of Rome were driven out. Egypt's ancient gods like Ra and Horus died. So did Greek deities like Zeus and Apollo. The tribal belief systems of Aboriginal people in Australia was wiped out. The Mayan and Incan gods are scarcely remembered in South America today. So Hinduism is amongst those very few civilizations that actually withstood the assault. And what disquiets, I think, many people is the idea that we could join that list of extinct cultures. And Siddharth, it's important to distinguish between religion and culture. In Indonesia, for example, you have 87% of the population which is Muslim.
Yes.
But the country has not forgotten its Hindu civilizational roots. The 20,000 rupiah note still has a Ganesh ji prominently on the note. Or for example, in Malaysia, 67% of the population is Muslim. But the Hikayat Seri Rama is the Malay literary adaptation of the Ramayana. And it is still performed today, even today with shadow puppets with much fanfare. In Thailand, 93% of your population is Buddhist, but all kings in the monarchy are still referred to as King Rama, which takes off on the Rama of Ayodhya. And their royal emblem, by the way, continues to be the Garuda. So in the Philippines, you have 90% of a Catholic population, Christian population, but you still have the famous dance, the Singkil, that is based on the Ramayana. So frankly, it is always said that you cannot really know where you are going until you know where you have come from. It is our duty to reawaken this past, remembering, revitalizing, and reinforcing our cultural roots is our duty.
I'm so that you actually mentioned the example of Southeast Asia as somebody who's visited Thailand. The Suvarna Bhumi International Airport, as it's called, in Bangkok, actually has a huge graphical representation of the Sagar Manthan. And that, of course, reminds us of our roots and the reach and spread of Hinduism or the Hindu way of life to different parts of the world, dating back to the time of Rajaraja Chola as well. So what is really the significance, Mr. Sanghi, of what we're actually witnessing right now about this revival that you speak of?
The significance, Siddharth, is that we have a prime minister who is proud of his civilization, his roots, and his heritage. That era where there was a conscious effort to deny our Hindu roots is now a matter of the past. Honestly, you look at, for example, recently, the Mahakaleshwar Mandir. Now, that one single mandir, for example, if you go back into history, you would find that it had been destroyed by Iltutmish of the Delhi Sultanate. And in fact, the present structure was built by the Maratha general Ranoji Shinde sometime in the 1700s. But this is not the only wound that we have experienced as a civilization. The attacks on Somnath, the burning of Nalanda, the destruction of Ram Janmabhoomi, the destruction of Kashi Vishwanath, Mathura. I mean, historians like Sitaram Goel peg the overall number of temples destroyed at about roughly 40,000 odd. So what hurts many people is not the destruction in and of itself, but the conscious effort to deny that it happened. No one wishes to hold today's generation of non-Hindus responsible for historical injustices. That would be so stupid. But why whitewash history? I think that is really what has irked a lot of people. And those who believe that India's secularism is challenged by a temple or, what have you, we should realize that the Ganga Jamuna tradition of this Sanatan Dharma has made us survive all odds. In most Muslim majority countries, Islamization eventually does creep in. So you just need to look at 49 Islamic countries around the world and you'll realize that if you wish to really preserve pluralism, then probably if you preserve Hindu syncretism first, then that is a short way of doing it. We are proud of this, what we consider to be Ganga Jamuna. For Ravi Shankar, we have an Ustad Ali Akbar Khan. For a Vikram Sarabhai, we have an Abdul Kalam. For Narayan Murthy, we have an Azim Premji. So that is the wonderful aspect about India. But then ask yourself, why is there no Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb in, let's say, Pakistan or Bangladesh? So the answer is the underlying Hindu ethos that you cannot ignore. It is this Hindu ethos that gave sanctuary to others like the Zoroastrian refugees who were fleeing Muslim persecution in Iran, or whether it was the St. Thomas Christians who were provided a home in Kerala, or the first Jewish refugees who settled on the Malabar coast, or whether it was the Buddhist monks who were being killed by the by the Chinese, the People's Liberation Army of China. And India welcomed the Dalai Lama along with thousands of Buddhists at that time. The country has accepted refugees from Bangladesh during the 1971 genocide, the Baghdadi Jews, the Bene Israel. That spirit of refuge is intrinsic to India's dharmic value. And it, I think, irks a lot of people when we try to whitewash all of this only in the spirit of trying to preserve, quote unquote, the secular tradition of the Constitution. We must preserve dharmic values first. That is the significance of what is happening.
Mr. Sanghi, isn't this also a battle of what are competing ideas of what the idea of India actually is? I mean, in fact, there can be multiple ideas of India competing against each other at the same time. Some might actually win primacy at one point in time in history and another at another point in time. So this, in fact, goes back to the time that we became independent, when there was a certain idea of India that the then Prime Minister of India, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, advocated that the state should actually divorce itself from all matters of religion. Now, of course, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, we are seeing a different idea of India being put into practice, where he, as Prime Minister, as a constitutional authority, is actively partaking in what many would call religious rituals or even Sanatani rituals. So isn't this a battle of ideas in a certain respect? And can there be a balancing act or some kind of harmony between these two different ideas of India? That's the next question.
So, honestly speaking, if you go back into Sanatan Dharma, the truth is that what Sanatan Dharma says is that there are multiple truths, and your truth does not negate my truth. So, in that sense, it is truly a vast ocean in that sense. But coming back to your specific question about the Prime Minister and his inauguration of mandirs, honestly, the word secular has been overused and misused in our country to the extent that now there is a fatigue factor. The writers of the preamble to our constitution omitted the word because they realized that India could never be truly secular. The word was only inserted sometime around 1975-76 during the emergency years by a lame duck parliament. So the question you have to ask yourself is that did the omission of that word up to 1975 mean that we were not secular before 1975-76? Were we a Hindu Rashtra between 1947 and 1976? by leaving out the word from the preamble, the fathers of the constitution were actually reminding us that Sanatan Dharma is committed to Vasudeva Kutumbakam, that the world is one family. India is not plural because of a word that has been inserted into the constitution in 1975. It is plural because of the fundamental characteristic of Sanatan Dharma that has an ingrained respect for all faiths. The word secular, unfortunately, has been used dishonestly in India. Strictly speaking, secularism means separation in totality of church and state. In a secular nation, the government must stay away from anything that is remotely religious. But how could the Nehru government have modified and codified Hindu personal law in the 1950s if we were truly secular? How could we recognize Sharia-based Muslim personal law? The management of over 4 lakh Hindu temples was taken over by the government. How could this be remotely considered secular? How was overriding the Shah Bano through Muslim Women's Bill secular? How are the Hajj Committee Act and the Waqf Act secular? So, and think about this. Let's not only look at India. Let's look at the actions around the world. In America, a new president takes his oath of office by placing his hand on the Holy Bible. Does that make America less secular? In England, the monarch also happens to be head of the Church of England. Does that make England non-secular? And does the French government restoring the burnt down Notre Dame Cathedral make France less secular? So the pluralism of India owes a thanks to its roots in Sanatan Dharma, which says that there are multiple truths. You may say that the Shivling is a stone, and I may say that a stone is a Shivling. And we can both be right. We can have 300 versions of that great epic that we call the Ramayana, but your version does not negate mine. We will respect both equally. This is very different to the Abrahamic notion of one God. We are plural. It is not due to a word in the constitution, but due to the ingrained respect for multiple faiths and multiple truths. And it is our duty to preserve Sanatan Dharma. The actions of the PM, I see them, are in consonance with that.
Very consistent with the principles of the Sanatan Dharma, as you say, Mr. Sanghi, but there is also apprehension, and this is a slightly political question that I'm going to ask you, that all this cannot actually be completely divorced from the realm of politics, that this is also a means to mobilize Hindus in favor of one political party, to consolidate the Hindu vote, which the BJP was in fact a beneficiary of in both 2014 and 2019. So this is a continuation of that. How do you respond to that specific charge?
See, the truth is that the mobilization was an inevitable outcome of the years of denial of history as well as a discounting of the Hindu ethos. The mobilization would have happened even without a BJP government. That is the honest to God truth. When one uses fire and the power of force to temper steel, what does it do? Does it make the steel softer or does it make it harder? What we are experiencing is that increasingly Hindus believe that they should no longer be liberal towards illiberal ideas. If Hindus can take a joke about Durga or Gaumutra or the Shivling, then others should be also open to jest regarding their sacred elements. If Hindus can view all faiths as paths to a greater power, then other faiths must also accept that idea. If churches and mosques can be free of governmental control, then Hindu temples must also be unshackled. If secular education is the cornerstone of liberalism, then madrasa education cannot teach a strict interpretation of the faith. Gender equality is a worthy ideal, then hijab cannot be acceptable. If Hindu personal law can be modified through an act of parliament, then a uniform civil code must also be possible. If conversion is acceptable, then so is ghar wapasi. If seeking minority votes is acceptable based on religion, then so is seeking votes of the majority. So political consolidation is not the game that is being played. It is about political consolidation is a byproduct of this new attitude of being illiberal to illiberal attitudes.
So, Mr. Sanghi, if I may just follow up and ask you that, of course, reciprocity needs to be an underlying principle of secularism, and that's unfortunately still an unfinished chapter in the history of secularism in this country. But having said that, do you believe that this reawakening, as you describe it, could in fact spawn an illiberalism of its own kind? Are you apprehensive about that? Do we need to guard ourselves against that? What's your prescription?
No, there is that worry that the problem with this approach could lead to quote unquote Abrahamization of Dharmic pluralism.
Yes.
And unfortunately, that would be like cutting off one's nose in order to spite one's face. So what really is the solution here? As I see it, there isn't one single remedy. Rather, it lies in a series of small fixes. For example, the implementation of a uniform civil code could really prevent unequal legal treatment of faiths. Or freeing Hindu temples from government control could allow Hindus to use the donations as other communities do, possibly even resettling the refugees that come under CAA. Reforming and monitoring the curriculum of religious schools could allow future generations to have a more syncretic view. Settling outstanding festering wounds, for example, Ayodhya, Kashi or Mathura, could prevent digging up thousands of historical injuries. Amending the Indian Penal Code so that its provisions cannot be used as a blasphemy whip. That's also very important. It could lead to a more open society. But most importantly, at the end of the day, if we can deliver, and which I think this government is set on doing, deliver healthcare, sanitation, education, justice, security, infrastructure, and economic opportunity, then automatically, and that too without bias, to my mind, I think this would reduce the opportunities for extremism and radicalization. I think that is really where the answer lies. I know it sounds simplistic. It's not that simple. But I think these are small fixes that could go a long way.
And a final question now. Do you see this reawakening that's now been reinitiated in a certain sense, a completely irreversible trend? And where is all this heading? Is there a certain conclusion, a certain end of the tunnel that this particular reawakening is approaching towards? And what is that end that this country ought to actually meet in terms of its objectives, in terms of its principles? If you could shed some light on that as well.
I think if simply any government of the day continues to remain, because as I started out by saying that secularism actually means separation of state and faith. There should be no overlap between the two. However, in India, that never happened. So it amounted to actually sort of the avowed goal of remaining equidistant from every faith. But the truth of the matter is that also did not happen. For the longest time, the test of secularism was whether certain segments felt that an issue is secular or not, or whether the treatment of an issue is secular or not. I think that for all practical purposes is now dead and gone. I think the approach is simply that, listen, India has a much longer history with its dharmic roots, with its civilizational ethos, and the constitution is a product of that. It is not the other way around. I think for the longest time, we have been confusing the cart for the horse. So the way at least I see it moving is that I would imagine that going forward, it's not too distant a day when I think the Uniform Civil Code will get passed. I believe that there will be a new legislation allowing the Hindu temples to be managed by the Hindu community. And I believe that there will be a renewed effort in order to make sure that economic benefits trickle down to one and all without any bias. And if that happens, we automatically have a far more enlightened future generation, as a result of which the potential for extremism and radicalization would be that much less.
Very clearly put there, Mr. Sanghi. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Lots of food for thought, and it was a privilege and an honor to be speaking to you. I wish you all the best with your future books as well. Much appreciated, sir, and wish you a very happy Diwali.
Thank you, Siddharth. A very happy Diwali to you as well as to all your viewers.
Thank you, sir.